Let's go, Vince.
All right,
go.
man. This is it. This is our first duo live event here at Irish Breakdown. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Irish fans, to yet another edition of our Irish Breakdown podcast. And we're going live with this one because we figured, you know what? Why the heck not? We want to bring the people.
Well, it was a little late for us to record it, then get it up, and then go. So we're like, hey, let's go live, and hopefully we can. This live will go a little bit smoother than the one that I tried to do earlier, where I had yet to figure out how to get sound from Logan Diggs's announcement. But yeah, so we're ready to go. We're ready to break down Notre Dame's 2021 offensive recruiting class, which is a good one. It is a strong class.
No question. And I'm excited about this offensive class. I mean, you said it in your breakdown online that the reason Notre Dame has a top 10 class is because of the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's what's super exciting about this class. And this is what I'm super excited to talk about. Look, the bottom line is, Bryan, you and I are both offensive coaches, and we can appreciate and we can get excited about defense, but come on, man. It's the offensive side of the ball. That's what we want to talk about. So that is what this podcast is going to be about. First, your overall impressions of this offensive class from a this is what they needed standpoint to this is what they ended up with standpoint. Your overall thoughts on this class, Bryan?
I think landing Logan Diggs was the final straw, because that was going to be the one position, if they didn't get him, that I think Notre Dame would have been short on numbers. Okay. I think with him in the class, they've met their numbers needs everywhere. They got the quarterback they needed. They signed two, actually. Got two quarterbacks, got two running backs, got three receivers, got two tight ends, got five offensive linemen. So first and foremost, from a number standpoint, they were good. I mean, even at a couple positions, maybe one guy beyond where they really had a need at the position. And then I think you look at what's next. So you meet your needs, number one. Okay, did you land impact players? Tyler Buckner, impact player. Right. Lorenzo Styles, impact player. Deion Colzie has the upside of an impact player, so he can be an impact player. I think Kane Barong has the upside of an impact player. And then along the offensive line, you got two top 100 recruits. So you literally landed impact players. And I'm someone who doesn't subscribe to the notion that you need a five-star running back to be a great offense. I think Notre Dame got, to me, impact players at running back. Maybe not the high-level recruit version of an impact player, but guys that as football players are impact players. And so when you can kind of push that combination of buttons where you got your needs met from a number standpoint, you landed depth, you landed high-end talent. I think those are the things that you look at and say, that's the makings of an outstanding class. And even though there's no guys at the skill positions that I think are ready to step on the field and be a Michael Floyd type of freshman or a Michael Mayer type of freshman, the upside is there. And I think the other part is none of those guys are needed to play as freshmen. So if they play as freshmen, great. You know, there's a couple guys that I think should get on the field as freshmen. I think Deion Colzie should play, Lorenzo Styles should play, Tyler Buckner should play, but they don't have to play for Notre Dame to be successful next season. So I think that's another part of it too. But they really hit all the right notes. And it was an interesting cycle because a lot of these guys, they got way early. If you really think about it, a lot of these guys committed before Tommy Rees even took over as the offensive coordinator.
That's a good point.
And so they had, so that allowed them to kind of focus on the guys they needed to add, hold on to the guys they needed to hold on to. Lost one of them, got them back, which they also did on defense, and they were able to really add to it. And there's a couple guys that are that could. Are project type of guys that maybe don't pan out, but if they do, it makes this class better. And we'll kind of dive into that as we get into the specific position by position aspect of this.
Yeah, I want to put out there, since we are doing this live, if anybody has any specific offensive recruiting questions, you can throw them over into the YouTube chat, and we'll try to answer them if they go along with kind of where we're at and what we're talking about, and it goes with the flow of the show. But we want to definitely involve those that are watching, and we appreciate you guys for hanging out. I threw a couple of comments up there from Brandon and Jack, and we appreciate you guys logging in to take a look as well. But let's jump into this class, Bryan. I really want to talk about the quarterback position up front. I mean, gosh, who doesn't? This particular quarterback has been in the class for quite some time. It's always funny when you follow recruiting, and especially from the quarterback standpoint, those are usually the first couple guys to get into a class. And it just feels like, Tyler Buchner's been connected to Notre Dame for so long, and now he's just getting on campus for the first time as a Notre Dame player. So a lot of anticipation for him. I want to get your thoughts on a grade for the quarterback position, how they were able to do bringing him into the fold, and about Tyler Buchner as a player for Notre Dame.
Well, I think that this is an A grade. I mean, to me, this is a no-brainer A grade. You really only needed one quarterback in the class. They signed a second, Ron Paulus the second, or is it Ron Paulus the third?
I think he's the third.
So that gives you a numbers need because, you have some numbers situations. I don't think Jack Cohn was committed at that point in time as a grad transfer when they signed him. So you met your needs numbers, but really it's about, can you get difference makers on campus? And the reality is they got a difference maker on campus. Tyler Buchner is a difference maker. I think Tyler Buchner fits Notre Dame well. I think he's a real respectful young man. I mean, even talking, the only time I really talked to him was soon after he committed. He was, I think, a sophomore at the time, real respectful, happy-go-lucky, but a grinder. We interviewed Malik Zaire at Irish Breakdown recently, and he broke Tyler's game down. Well, Malik worked Tyler out at the Elite 11. Malik was one of the counselors, one of the coaches there. So he got to see Tyler's work ethic up close. And everybody you talk to that knows the kid says he's going to work. I mean, he is going to put in the work, and you need that. And he's a kid that doesn't seem to be, I mean, I love Jimmy Clausen as a quarterback, but Tyler Buchner's not showing up in a stretch limo Hummer to announce his commitment to Notre Dame. There's a little bit more humility to him than maybe some of the other greats that Notre Dame has had. So I think he fits in that regards, but being able to keep him in the class, being able to allow him to sort of be the base of this class is important. Now, the next step is going to be developing. That's a different conversation for a different day, but Tyler Buchner's a modern day quarterback. He can make plays from the pocket. He can make plays when things break down. He can throw off platform. He can make plays on the move with his arm. He can make plays on the move with his legs. He really has everything you want in a quarterback. Now it's, can you build around him? Can you commit to him in a way that maybe you weren't able to develop and commit to some of the other quarterbacks? And this is really going to be the first quarterback. I mean, Drew Pine and Tyler Buchner are the first group of quarterbacks, the highly ranked quarterbacks that will be Tommy Rees only recruits. I think when Tommy Rees took over Brandon Wimbush, there were already some bad habits that were established by the previous coach that he couldn't get out of them. And same thing with Ian Book. He had a degree where he impacted it, but he also didn't have him for a year or two. So I think this will be a guy that you can say, look, we're going to find out what Tommy Rees is made of. He's got two really good quarterbacks, in my opinion, in back-to-back classes, Drew Pine and Tyler Buchner. Between the two of them, you need to be able to develop one of them into an impact player. And the thing is too, they're different types of players.
Sure.
Tyler Buchner is more of a dual threat guy. Drew Pine's more of a drop back and throw it guy. But between the two of them in back-to-back years, if you can't develop a championship caliber quarterback with these two guys, I don't really know what to tell you at that point.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. And it's going to be interesting because I really like what Tyler Buchner brings to the table. I'm a little worried. And of course, his junior year, his numbers were, they were video game numbers, basically. Who couldn't be impressed with what he was able to do. Now, the competition wasn't as good. And so he heard that and then transferred schools out in California to up the level of his play for his senior year, which I totally respect that he was able to do that for his senior year. And then, of course, COVID hit, his season got canceled. So he hasn't taken a meaningful snap since the fall of 2019. Do you think that is going to affect him in a negative way, as he shows up here at Notre Dame?
Only if the expectation was to play him day one as your starting quarterback. I mean, if there was the expectation for that, then that would hurt him. Sure. I don't think that ever should be the expectation for a freshman quarterback unless you're talking about a generational guy like a Trevor Lawrence. And even then, Trevor Lawrence didn't start the first 3 or 4 games of his college career. So, I think that's where I felt landing Jack Cohn was huge for Notre Dame, because now you don't have to play Tyler as your starter, or you don't have to play Drew Pine as your starter. You can let those guys battle. And then if Tyler emerges as good as we think he can be, now it's finding a home for him. And we'll dive into more of how to play him as we get closer to the spring. But I don't think that it's going to hurt him in the current circumstance because they don't need him to play. If he's not ready next year, then he's not ready. You let him learn. You let him cook in the oven for a little bit. And then when his time comes, he's ready to play. Now, that might hurt him if he's starting in 2022, but it's not going to take him a whole lot of time to get caught up to speed as long as he's able to face a lot of those live reps in practice. And then any chance you get next year to get him on the field, you take advantage of. And, I think that'll be something to help him develop. But the physical tools are there, the character's there, the intelligence is there, the work ethic is there. Now it's just about putting it all together, and putting a supporting cast around him, which I think they will, and letting his talent take over.
Yeah, no question. And we've got a quick question from one of our viewers. You want to take a look at it real quick?
Go for it. Let's roll.
All right. So Brandon asks, do you think Reese and Kelly will let Buckner keep his natural throwing motion as seen in his highlights, or try to alter it as seen at the Elite 11?
Now, the alter arm motion, from what I understand, was not something that Notre Dame dictated. That's something that Tyler and his quarterback coach felt he needed to do to increase his all-around accuracy as a quarterback. So it didn't look good at the Elite 11. It looked different. Now, what we don't know, however, since it's been a while since we've seen him, is he more comfortable with that now? The end of the day, I don't like tinkering with the guy's throwing motion unless it's something that keeps him from being effective. Tyler felt that there was a part of his throwing motion that kept him from being as effective and accurate on short to intermediate throws. So if he feels that this is something that he has to do to become a more consistent quarterback, short, mediate, intermediate, and deep, then do what you got to do. But it's got to be something he's comfortable with. What hurt Phil Jurkovec was they tried to change him to something that wasn't comfortable for him. There was no need for Phil Jurkovec to change his motion. This is a situation where Tyler and his quarterback coach felt like there was a need. Now, we'll find out this spring if it's going to work for him. But I don't think it's Notre Dame that was dictating that. I think if he's going out there and he's trying to do the kind of lower three-quarter kind of thing we saw from him at the Elite 11 and it's not working, then they will try to tinker with it. But if he shows up and he's doing that stuff and it looks weird, but if it's working, then roll with it. Because that's the biggest thing. You can't have a quarterback thinking about his throwing motion. It's just got to be there. The only thing I ever mess with a quarterback is his feet and his hips. Because, that's kind of like your steering system, if you're thinking of a rocket, right? Like it's, this is kind of the bomb, right? But, you need your guidance systems, and that's what the feet and the hips are. That's really all I care about. But as long as it's something he can do and he can repeat it, then I think that's something I can roll with. So we'll find out in the spring if he's come along with it and developed it and enhanced it. And I think that's one area where not playing this fall, small area, might have helped him, because now it can just be focused on a million reps of just focusing on getting those mechanics right. So even though he lost something in game experience, he can gain it by working with the quarterback's coach as far as enhancing that throwing motion without having to think about, we got to go out and beat so-and-so on Friday night.
Nope, makes a lot of sense. Anything else you want to add about Tyler Buckner before we move on to the next position group, sir?
No, I just think that you need a big-time quarterback to be successful, whether that's taking a 3-star like Mac Jones and he develops into that, or it's landing a big-time guy like Tyler Buckner. The fact is you need a talented quarterback, and he is a talented quarterback. And you can't have an elite offensive class without an elite quarterback, and I believe Tyler Buckner has elite talent. He was a 5-star for me initially. I dropped him down a little bit to a 4.5-star, which for me is a top 50 player, simply because we didn't see him as a senior.
Yeah.
And I think that experience aspect of it knocked his grade down just outside of that. But there's no doubting that he has 5-star tools. And if you don't believe me, go listen to the interview I did with Malik Zaire. He kept talking about how this is the kind of guy, if you develop him right, that can lead you to a national championship. He believes that, and he saw him on film and he saw him in person.
So let's move over to the, or I guess back over. I'm not sure. It depends on the formation. Let's start talking about the running back position here, Bryan. Huge get today, grabbing Logan Diggs, and there was some question marks as to whether he was actually going to come to Notre Dame, but he ended up putting on that Notre Dame hat today, which was great news for the Irish. 2-man class, Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. Give me your overall thoughts about the running back group as a whole, your grade.
I love it. I gave it a B+ simply because I don't give out many A's. I mean, I don't. I think that has got to be reserved for that elite top 5 in the country kind of haul. Having said that, what this class is, I gave it a B+. What it is a class that you can absolutely go toe-to-toe with anybody with, especially when you look at it, which is, I think the best way to look at recruiting is in pairs. If you look at comparing this two guys with Chris Tyree last year, you have a great compliment. And here's what I like about the two guys they got this year. Obviously, Adrian Esty was the guy that signed and announced his signature in December. And yeah, he was a guy that kind of came out of nowhere. He was a good player as a junior, but blew up as a senior. And, 6'1". He's listed as 6'1". I don't know if he's quite that tall, but it doesn't matter. He's 215 pounds. He can be a hammer, but he's got really nice feet, very nimble feet. I brought up Jerome Bettis as a comparison simply from a footwork standpoint. I'm not saying he's Jerome Bettis, but that bigger body that's just really light on his feet. Jerome was huge, but he always was really light on his feet. I see that from Audric. He's a guy that he's a north-south runner, but at the same time, he understands setting up blocks. He understands making moves at the last second, getting on your run track, letting your block set up, and then making moves. He's a very disciplined runner, very efficient runner. There's like no wasted motion with this kid, which means if he's a 4.65, he plays like a 4.65, where you can get 4.5 guys that play like 4.65s because there's so much movement going on, false stepping and all those kind of things. He is a north-south, do your business kind of guy. He'll hammer you if you're in the hole, but he's also not a guy that's just going to look for contact, meaning he's going to maximize yards. If he's got to make you miss, he's going to make you miss. If he's got to bounce it, he's going to bounce it. And so there's a lot to like there. He doesn't do much in the pass game, but he's got the size to be a really good pass blocker. And you watch him on a few screenplays. I mean, he catches the ball clean. He can make people miss. He's a big hammer, but he's not a guy that's going to blow you away with pass catching skills. So switch over to Logan Diggs, who can be that guy. Yeah. He is a very good pass catcher. Not only does damage in high school as a pass catcher, I've seen him at camps where he's running routes like a receiver. I mean, he's a really talented guy. And I mean, you could use this comparison for both of them, but imagine if Tony Jones was faster. That's what these two guys are. Yeah. Especially Logan Diggs, because Audric reminds me of Tony Jones as a runner. What makes the comparison even more accurate for Logan Diggs is Logan is so much more effective as a pass catcher, where Tony was a really good pass catcher. So I think that brought something to the table as well, in that you have a guy that can hammer you between the tackles, and you pop in Logan Diggs highlight tape, and there's plays where he's dipping and ripping through contact, and he plays good competition down in Louisiana. He's playing St. Augustine, John Curtis, a lot of those programs, and which means he's playing against dudes that are going to school for free the next 4 years, right? So he's running over guys, but he's also he's nimble. I mean, there's several plays where he's like leaping over people. He's really good outside. He runs the outside zone as good as any back that Notre Dame has recruited at the high school level. He can make plays in the pass game as a route runner out of the backfield. He's a pass blocker. He returns punts for his high school team. He took a couple back, long way this year. So they're both big backs, and so they both complement Chris Tyree really well, but they also complement each other very well, because you can do things with Audric as the runner and Logan out of the backfield, where you could use them together. Yep. I wouldn't say I'd use them as often as I would maybe use Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree, but you can do it.
It can be done,
And when you look at it with these two, with Tyree, you've got two hammers, and then you've got Chris Tyree coming in as the big play guy. That's a lethal combination. So I really like these guys. They're not elite athletes, but they're just really good running backs.
I will say
think there's something for that.
I will say, watching a little bit of Logan Diggs's highlights today. Now, obviously, I broke his film down before, but watching him today, I was just reminded of the fact that he does kind of look for contact, and he's not afraid to run somebody over. And I'm not talking between the tackles. Like, I'm talking when he's outside, and there's the option of stepping out of bounds or running a dude over and staying in bounds. He's going to run a dude over. And he runs with an attitude, and I really, really like watching that, frankly.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, you I love running backs that are that way. You know what I mean? Like, if you get a DB in space, he's going to say, and I just kind of get this vision of him like The Rock. Remember back during the Attitude Era, where he's just like kind of got that, just that's Logan Diggs in space, right? But at the same time, he doesn't have to be that way, Vince. He's a guy that also can do a lot of different things where he is elusive. He can make you miss. He can catch the ball. There's just a lot of different things that he brings to the table as a running back. And, I love those dual threat guys. And honestly, Vince, you have to have at least one or two guys like that in today's game. You have to have guys. And if you have a guy that can be a hammer and also catch balls out of the backfield, look, he's a Louisiana kid, so let's just go there. He's a different kind of athlete than the Clyde Edwards-Helaire kid from LSU, but it's a similar type of impact he brings at a game. He can run, he can line up in the slot, he can run routes out of the backfield, he can run the ball between the tackles, he can run the ball outside. Is he as explosive as Clyde Edwards-Helaire was back then? No, I don't think he's quite as explosive, but he's also bigger. So this was a big pickup, and I know he's a 3-star recruit. I had him as a 4-star recruit. This would have been a loss. There was no spinning it. That would have been a big loss. And so kudos to Terry Joseph for getting him into the class, and kudos to Tommy Reese and Lance Taylor for being able to convince him to stay in the class, because getting those two together is huge. And you went from 2 years ago where we're looking at the backfield and we're saying, I don't know, to now you're looking at it and you're like Kyron Williams, Chris Tyree, Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, Seblemister, and then now you're recruiting some dudes in the 2022 class, and you're feeling really good about it. And that's the other area where it helps, Vince, is now you can narrow your 2022 focus on the best of the best in that class because you have these two kids.
It's funny that you should mention Seblemister, because we have a question about good old Sebo. And I realize this is a recruiting podcast, but we're talking about, where these guys fit as they move in and onto the roster. And David writes, what about Sebo? When he gets out there, he runs hard, shows some speed, does not go down easy. Why can't he get more clock?
I think it's just because of how talented the other guys are. Yep. I mean, that's where you should be. When you're a big-time program, that's where you should be, where there are really good football players on the sideline that can't get on the field because the guys on the field are just too good. That wasn't necessarily the case at receiver. At running back, it was the case, where who are you going to take snaps away from? You're going to take it away from Kyron. You're going to take it away from Chris Tyree.
Right.
I think Sebo is a kid that you try to convince him he's not a big-time player, and he's going to laugh at you and then go out there and try to prove you wrong. But I think he's more of a complimentary player. I think the other thing about Sebo is I don't know how long he can sustain that style of play over the course of a full game. He runs way harder than his body type would suggest.
That's fair.
Not a really big guy. That's the nice thing about these two kids that Notre Dame just signed. However, these are 200+ pound kids the minute they step foot on campus.
Right.
And they haven't even spent time in in the Notre Dame strength and conditioning program, which is only going to add to it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And we got one more comment about the running backs before we move on to the wide receivers from Mike. He wants to know, is this the best stable of running backs at Notre Dame in, and I'm guessing he wants to know how long it's been since they've had this group.
Since they've gotten a 1-2 punch like this, I think you got to go back to the 2015 class with Josh Adams and Dexter Williams. I mean, look, let's be honest. Running back recruiting pre-Autry Denson was pretty good. You got this duo in 2013. You got the Greg Bryant, Torian Folson class in 2013. You signed a 2-man class back in, 2000, Tony Alford. You had the Armando Allen, Robert Hughes class. You had the Sierra Wood, Theo Riddick class, which Tony Alford also signed. And then for 4 years, under a certain position coach, the recruiting at the position went down. Now it's going back up. And that's why it was so important to get Logan Diggs, because you got another strong 2-man class that you haven't had. I mean, I love Sebo and Jameer Smith were good players, but this duo is more dynamic than that duo. So if this duo can be as good as Josh Adams and Dexter Williams were, then that's certainly a plus for Notre Dame. And then, like I said, you throw Chris Tyree in the mix. It's big for Notre Dame. They've certainly replenished the depth chart at running back the last 2 years.
Well, and from a stable of on the roster, like the 5 running backs that are going to be in that room, I think top to bottom, this is the best stable of running backs that they've had in quite some time as well.
It's certainly in that conversation. You know, I mean, I think when you look at the fact that some of the players will be a little older, I think had Torian Folston not got hurt that first game of the year in 2015, that was a pretty good backfield. You had Torian Folston, CJ Prosise, Josh Adams, and Dexter Williams. The next 2017, you had Dexter and Tony Jones and Josh Adams. You had CJ Holmes and Deion McIntosh. So you look at like that 5-man group, for example. At the top, that group I think could hang with the current group. But what's going to make this group different is because of the 2 guys you just brought in. the 3-4-5 is better than those other groups were at 3-4-5.
Yep.
And that's important because what we don't know, Vince, we don't know what the COVID restrictions are going to be next year. Are they going to loosen the whole, if you test positive, you're out for 2 weeks? Is that going to be the same? Because if that continues, then it's even more reason why you need numbers in the backfield. Plus, this is a position that takes punishment. What if a guy goes down? They were fortunate that they didn't really have any major injuries at running back this year, but you can't count on that next year. I mean, let's go back and look at 2015. You lost Torian Folson in the opener, then CJ gets hurt against Pitt, and you're down to your 2 freshmen, Josh Adams and Dexter Williams. So you needed the depth, and landing Logan Diggs makes this arguably about as deep 1-5 as Notre Dame has been in a very, very long time.
All right, Bryan, let's talk wide receivers in this year's class. A pretty decent class hauled in by Notre Dame, I would say, and I'm obviously being a bit sarcastic. A 3-man class at wide receiver. I'm not sure necessarily what you were looking for as far as the numbers at wide receiver, but after the class that they brought in last year, you combine it with this class, and I'm fairly impressed. But I want to get your thoughts on this class as a whole and how you graded them out.
I gave him an A-. I think that it's an A- simply because, again, I don't give A's out very often. I gave out 1. I love this class. I think you can make a case that this 2021 Notre Dame class is as good as Brian Kelly has had, top to bottom.
Wow.
Maybe there aren't as many 5-stars as you had in the 2013 class with Jalen Smith and Max Redfield and Greg Bryan and Eddie Vanderdoes. Maybe the 2011 class had Aaron Lynch and Stephon Tuitt, but just 1 through 27, this is as good as 1 through 25, because one of those guys is a kicker. You're as good as you've had. And I think that's important. When you're talking about guys in the 20s are guys that I could see if the lights all turn on, this guy could be an impact player for Notre Dame. That's the kind of depth you need. There's a lot of high upside guys. And I think receiver is a perfect example of that. Deion Colzie to me is not a 5-star player. Right now, he's a borderline top 100 kind of guy, but the tools are there. And here's some things you have to understand about Deion Colzie, for example. He's a year younger than most people in his grade. So he's basically a junior age-wise, which means his body still has a little bit left in it. I think being in a private school where he was just so much bigger and more athletic than everybody he played against, you don't really have to learn how to dig deep when you play against competition you're that much better than. You don't really learn that till you get pushed and challenged and kind of punched in the mouth by a cornerback that's unlike anyone you've ever gone against. And then what do? Well, everything I've heard about Deion Colzie is he's going to respond well to that. But you don't know what you don't know till you realize that you don't know it, till it's obvious in front of your face. And so I think he's a guy that has, he needs time to become that kind of player. He's more Miles Boykin than he is Michael Floyd. But they both became really good football players when it's all said and done. So I look at Deion Colzie, and he's kind of the guy that that started the class. I believe he was the first commit. Him and Lorenzo Styles were like a few hours apart. He left the class. They were able to convince him to come back in, but he was a guy that committed early. I mean, he committed the weekend that they beat USC back in 2019. Him and Lorenzo Styles both committed that weekend. So he'd been in the class for a while. Very talented, big receiver, can stretch the field. He's really advanced as a route runner. Like if you watch him, Vince, he's not really advanced to the level where like he understands leverage and aiming points and stemming a guy up properly to manipulate him. But as far as like the top end technique, he's really sound. He understands, he's got really loose hips, really good feet. He plays corner in high school.
Right.
And Brian Smith, who was one of recruiting contributors at Irish Breakdown, he went and saw him in live, and he was like, this kid could play DB at the Division I level, maybe not at like a Notre Dame level, but he could play. And you don't do that if you don't have hips, And so he's really fluid athlete that to me is just scratching the surface of what he can be. And I think at a place like Notre Dame, in the strength program he's going to get, facing the competition he's going to face, I think his game's going to take off. And he's a very talented player. And then you look at Lorenzo Styles, completely different type of athlete. I mean, Deion Colzie's 6'4", 200 pounds. He's a boundary guy. Go up and get it. Who can do some things after the catch. Then you have Lorenzo Styles, 6 foot, 175, dynamic, explosive. Lorenzo's an interesting kid, Vince, because I liked him as a junior. I thought he was like a top 150 kind of guy as a junior. Liked him, but I thought there was another gear there that we hadn't seen yet. we saw it as a senior. I mean, he just had that extra gear. And he actually came from an offense that kind of tamped down his receiver ability. It's a running offense. They didn't really have a quarterback that could – I think their quarterback's going to Northwestern, but I think he's going to Northwestern to play like linebacker. You know what I mean? Like, he was just an athlete. So you didn't get a chance to see that whole arsenal. So the coach, like a smart coach, and Pickerington Central is a great program. He'd use him in the backfield. He'd run him on reverses. There's a play I'm watching him on national TV this year where Lorenzo, keep in mind, he's 175 pounds. He gets a ball off tackle, and he's got a DB in the hole, and he just runs him over. He just, boom, runs him over. There's a toughness to this kid. You watch him play cornerback, and he's a bully. I mean, he's just throwing guys to the ground. Again, he's 175 pounds. He's not a big kid. So I love that toughness. He certainly has the genes. His dad played at Ohio State. But as a senior also, we saw a burst from him as a returner, and on the few times he was able to press the ball vertically. He's got a gear to him. So those two complement each other very well. And then you have Jaden Thomas, who is not as big as Dion. He's not as explosive as either one of them, but he's just a really good football player. Good feet. He's a good athlete. I think he's going to try and play baseball at Notre Dame. He's a very good baseball player. And, 6'1", 6'2", about 200 pounds. He's listed at 185 by Notre Dame. He's much bigger than that now. But just solid player, good route runner, tough kid, knows how to make plays after the catch, is got really good down the field ball skills, good body control, which you'd expect from a guy that's a really good Division I caliber outfielder. You'd think he'd be pretty good at tracking the deep ball, which he is. And he's just a nice complementary player. You can put him in the slot. You can put him out, you can put him in the slot if you want to use the slot like you did Chase Claypool in 2017, a bigger guy to work the middle of the field, do some blocking. You can put him in the slot or on the outside where he can use his size to stretch the field. So there's a lot of different things you can do with Jaden, and he complements those other two very well. So this is a very strong class. The reason I gave it an A-, and even it was more closer to a B+ than it was an A, is just because there is no surefire day one step on the field difference maker, elite player. And I think you need that to be an A, and Tyler Buckner is that kind of talent. None of these guys are that yet. They're all going to need a little bit of work, but it's a very good group. And then when you combine it with last year's group of Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts, and Jay Brunell, very strong 2-year class for Notre Dame.
We got a couple of questions about the wide receivers. I'm going to throw at you here real quick, Bryan. Some good ones. I think I know where you're going to go with this one, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Zona Irish asks, what is the problem with receiving recruiting, or is it the coaching?
I don't think there's any problem with the receiver recruiting. I mean, look, in the last 5 years, Notre Dame has had Will Fuller, Equanimous St. Brown, Miles Boykin, and Chase Claypool all go to the NFL as draft picks, right? Kevin Stepherson would have been had he made better decisions off the field. You're looking at a group now where Javon McKinley stepped up and had a good career. So you've had plenty of guys. Chris Brown played a key role in Notre Dame being successful. So I think that the problem has been development. I think it's back to what we've discussed in the past, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because we can have this. We're going to have a mailbag podcast on Friday.
Yes.
So look us up on our Facebook page, Irish Breakdown fan group page. You can send them to me on our website on those as well. But that's a great question for that. I think the problem has been that they're so scheme driven that they don't do a good enough job teaching guys how to play.
Right.
I think the other aspect of it is the expectations are so high for what a guy has to know to get on the field that it makes it harder for younger players to get on the field. Notre Dame doesn't do a good enough job of saying, here's our best players. Let's make sure our scheme is such that we are giving them an opportunity to go be successful. It's here's our scheme, and those guys have to step up to and play to that level, or we won't play them. It's the exact opposite of what they do on defense, which is we've talked about in other shows. And there's a reason why the defense has been good enough to play for a championship the last 3 years, but the offense hasn't, even though if you look at recruiting rankings, the offense blows the defense away.
Yes.
From a recruiting ranking standpoint.
Right.
Notre Dame had 7 starters on defense this year that were composite 3-star players. Think about that. Yep. And they were a top 10 defense, in my opinion, this year.
And I threw this one up there while you were talking because you were kind of answering it already about do we think we're going to see any of the freshman wide receivers on the field this year, knowing the playing of freshman receivers at Notre Dame.
I think we should. I don't know if there's enough proven veterans, and I think the other aspect of it is the proven veterans that Notre Dame does have injury histories. I hope that Brian Kelly. Here's the thing: I hope that they do play.
Me too.
For two reasons. Number one, good receivers are not 5-year players. They're just not.
Right.
You redshirted Miles Boykin. What did that do for you? He didn't come back for his 5th year.
Right.
Guys, and if a guy wants to come back for his 5th year as a receiver, odds are he's probably not going to be good enough to bring him back unless you're in a situation where you have a numbers problem like a Javon McKinley. He's not going to come back and be a star, right? So there's, Lorenzo Styles isn't a 5-year player. Deion Colsey's not a 5-year player. So play him. And it doesn't mean they're starters, but give them 5-10 snaps a game early and give them that opportunity to get on the field. My hope is that what we see from Notre Dame this offseason is that Brian Kelly, if he does what he says he is going to do, which is we look at the program every year, we analyze things. What are the things that are keeping us from getting that next level? If he genuinely does that with an open mind, he's going to say, we got to open things up a little bit more, which means simplifying. And that means getting Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts, Jay Brunell, Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, the opportunity to go out and find a role. And at least 3 of those guys has to play next year. Have to play. Absolutely have to play. I would imagine 2 of them will be from the last year's class, but give Lorenzo a chance to return punts.
Sure.
Give Deion a chance to go out there and be a number 2 or a rotation guy in the boundary, something like that. Give him a chance early against some of the weaker teams on your schedule. And there are some. Those guys can't play against Toledo. You know what I mean? And see what they can do. And then if they earn that right to play more, then they play more. But this is a class that would normally get a chance to play more. But you also have to remember, there's some really talented receivers already on the roster. Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Joe Wilkins, Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts, Kendall Abdul-Rahman, a guy we rarely talk about, but he's a very dynamic athlete, Avery Davis.
Right.
So, the opportunity's got to be earned, but they need that opportunity to earn it. And if they do, then you play them. And if they don't, you just keep working on them until they get to that point.
So Notre Dame, a lot of times it's called tight end U. So we got to talk about the tight ends. And they got a pretty decent 2-man class here this year. I don't know if it is the normal tight end class that Notre Dame brings in, but a lot of upside, I think. What are your thoughts on this class as a whole in your grade?
I think it's a good group. I don't see a Michael Mayer in this group.
Right.
But it's a good group. You needed depth. You have 2 complementary players. You're going to hear me say that a lot when we're breaking down these classes, complementary players. And that's important. I don't want a lot of cookie cutters because cookie cutters make it harder to get them on the field together. You've got a guy that's more of a hybrid guy that can do a lot of things, can line up. You got a bigger guy that's more traditional. You have complementary players, and that's important.
Sure.
2 guys that I don't know if they're necessarily play right away guys. Like I said, there's no Michael Mayer in this group, but there's some guys that with some time and some work, I think have a chance to be really good. And I think this was a good year to take a chance on some guys like that because you do have Michael Mayer coming back. You do have Kevin Bauman coming back. You do have George Takis coming back. So you've got 3 veteran tight ends coming back. So you don't necessarily need a tight end to step in and play. So, I mean, that's really where you're at.
So let's break them down here. Kane Barong, he's probably the leader in the clubhouse in this tight end class. And you and I have talked about it on other podcasts, or maybe it was on the radio show. I can't remember. They all kind of drift together after a while. But the differences between the recruit rankings for Kane Barong is astonishing as you go through the different services. Talk about that, and then where you kind of fall with him.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen a kid that had such a variety of rankings. So and I'm going to pull it up here to just give you specifics. So when you look at Kane Barong, ESPN ranks Kane Barong as I think it's in the 60s. Let's see here. I got it right here. ESPN ranks him as the number 51 player in the entire country. SI 99 ranks him as the number 61 overall player in the country. Rivals, I think, has him in the 40s as a kid from Georgia. They have him, I believe, in the 30s as a tight end. And so to see this diversity of opinion, 247 doesn't think very highly of Kane Barong either. I tend to be sort of in the middle with the 2. I think Kane Barong's a very good football player. I think he's definitely a top 200 kind of guy with some tools to be an even better player. So I think he's a guy that if you allow him to develop, and if he can fill out and continue improving his game, he's got a chance to be really good. Because I think he was held back in high school. He didn't play with his.
Yeah.
There wasn't a quarterback to get him the ball the way that you could. But the thing I was surprised about him, Vince, is when he committed to Notre Dame, he was listed at 6'4", like 220 pounds. Well, when you think of a 6'4", 220-pound guy, what do you think of? Athletic, hybrid.
Sure.
He is fast and he is that. But the first thing that stands out about him is he is a punishing blocker. And in that regards, his game really reminds me a lot of Tommy Tremble, although Kane has a little bit more traditional tight end in his pass catching game, but he is a physical, mean, aggressive blocker. And now he's in the 240s. Talk to a source close to him recently. He's going to check in at Notre Dame. I think he said he was 246 the day he left home. So he's put on some size.
Yeah.
Strong, tough kid, long arms, fast hands. And good vertical speed, and he's been working out with Terrence Edwards, who you remember, a former Georgia wide receiver who coaches at Pace High School. He is actually Jaden Thomas's position coach, but Terrence also works with a lot of kids from the Georgia area on teaching them how to play the game, route running and those type of things. And Kane's been working with him, and you can see the work paying off because he improved a lot as a route runner as a senior. But again, he just didn't have the kind of quarterback that could take advantage of it. But I think there's also the thing that hurts him is his listed weight is still, 220. And there's still a lot of people that are convinced that a tight end has in 2020 has to be like he was in 1985, which is 6'5", 250,
right?
Which is fine. I mean, there are tight ends that thrive that way, but there are also plenty of tight ends that are 6'3", 235 that are really good football players. So it's just about finding a guy that can block, can run routes, can catch the ball, and Kane Barron can do all those kind of things.
Well, talk to me about Mitchell Evans, who's from Wadsworth High School out of Ohio. You talked about, with the prototypical size and all this. He's 6'7", 240. That screams tackle to me. So
yeah, but do you know what position he played as a senior in high school?
What was it? Quarterback. Wasn't it? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that were assuming he would move to tackle. I don't think that's something the staff has been focused on. There's no reason you bring in Joe Alt and Caleb Johnson if you plan on moving Mitchell Evans to tackle. There's no reason to do it. Plus, that's not what his athletics traits say. He's a quality athlete. He's a lot like George Takis. He's more George Takis than he is Joe Alt, right? And Joe Alt we'll talk about in a little bit, but he's a high school tight end that Notre Dame is bringing in to play tackle, who's going to be a tackle. There's more George Takis to Mitchell Evans than there is anything else. He's not a real dynamic athlete as far as explosiveness, but he's really smooth and fluid. He looks like he's 12. I mean, that's the thing about him. He's got a baby face. And I was reading something, I think it was Indy Insider had a thing on him when he committed to Notre Dame, and he said he still has 4 baby teeth. I'm thinking, yeah, that checks out.
Wow.
Because he's just a young-looking kid. What that tells me is that this is a kid who hasn't hit that final growth spurt.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking 6'7", 240, and he still looks like he's 12. What's he going to look like in a couple of years when he's in the Matt Baylor strength program? So I think that's an intriguing thing. And then the question is, can he maintain that level of, fluidity? He's, again, he played quarterback. He ran around. He's a good athlete. Can he keep that when he hits that next growth spurt, or is he going to, is what happens with some kids as they get older and they hit that growth spurt, they get a little tighter, they're a little less flexible. But if he can keep that, he could be one of the surprises of this class. I need to see him do it as a tight end. That's the only thing keeping me from really putting him there is, I see a good athlete and all that kind of stuff, but I don't really see it when he plays tight end. I haven't seen it a whole lot. He looked better as a quarterback than he did a tight end athletically. So that's a thing, but you can't teach 6'7", you can't teach 240.
Facts.
And that's what he brings to the table. And look, John McNulty's a guy that I think has been around football a long time. Guy's been in the NFL a long time.
Yeah.
He felt good enough about Mitchell Evans to take him despite already having Kane Barong in the class. So clearly he saw something at that position. And so, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and see what Mitchell can bring to the table.
That's fair. So let's talk about the big uglies, baby. Let's talk about the offensive line because we know Notre Dame's track record for offensive line, and frankly, we're going to see how good that recruiting has been this year with 4 brand new offensive line, or 4 brand new starters, I should say, going into the offensive line. But this offensive line class, it's a 4-man class. Your thoughts on the class as a whole and your grade for them?
So I gave it a B plus, and this is the most interesting position group to break down, and I think probably going to be the most controversial. There's two ways to look at this class, and we need to be honest about both of them. The first one is what the class is. What the class is really good. It's a top 10 offensive line class in the country. When you sign 2 top 100 recruits, then you're doing well. And what's interesting is, the only consensus top 100 recruit, well, no, he technically wasn't. They didn't have a consensus top 100 recruit because SI 99 didn't have Rocco Spindler in the top 100. But As far as Rivals and ESPN, I think the only guy that was a top 100 in all of them, Rivals, 247, and ESPN, was Rocco. And had SI 99 had him in there, he would have been the only consensus. But that's pretty good. But I think the other way to look at it is what it should have been. And the fact of the matter is they had some poor planning early in the class. They went after some guys that they probably shouldn't have. Stayed engaged in some of those players like Lane and Tangwall longer than they should have. When we knew what he was making multiple trips to Michigan and Penn State, wouldn't come back to Notre Dame. That should have told you something a year before he committed somewhere else. Didn't prioritize some other guys like Wyatt Milam, and it ended up, missing on some of their top guys. So the 1-2 is as good as there is in the country, in my opinion. The problem is 3, 4, and 5 aren't as good as some past Notre Dame classes were at 3 and 4. They're that's just the reality. It's a good class, but you look at like 2014, for example, you had Quentin Nelson, you had Alex Bars, both top 100 recruits, and then your third guy was Sam Mustipher, another top 250 kind of guy. Caleb Johnson isn't that kind of guy. Joe Alt's not that kind of guy yet, and Pat Coogan is more of a good, solid depth player. So I think it's a very good class, but it had the potential to be even better. It should have been better, and that's why I didn't give it an A-. So that's part of it. But let's put that aside and focus on what this class is. And what this class is, you met your numbers needs +1, and you got some versatility. You got guys can play better. And then beyond the top 2 guys, and we'll dive into the specifics, you landed one player that to me could be the difference between this being a B+ class and an A class. And that would be Joe Alt. And we'll dive into that when we get into him. But this is a strong offensive line class. It could have been better, should have been better, yes, but still a very good offensive line class that you're not going to find more than 6 or 7 in the country that were better. There were some, but not a lot. And that's what you need. And you complement it with a strong 2-man group last year. So you overcome your numbers problem last year. You've overcome that to a degree by landing 5 this year, which is important. Now you just need another good year of numbers and high impact talent next year, and you're going to be back on track.
Yeah, well, I got to correct myself because I did say it was a 4-man class, and it's obviously a 5-man class. I was thinking, because we had talked earlier about how they needed 4, and that was in my head. So I apologize. Thanks for pointing it out, Brandon. That's my fault. But it's obviously a 5-man class. And so let's start breaking these guys down individually. Let's start with we'll say local, since it's Indiana, right? Avon, Indiana High School, Blake Fisher.
This is my number 1 player in the class. He was number 2 going into his senior year. It really isn't about Tyler Buckner taking a step back as much, because the only reason Tyler Buckner took a step back was just because he didn't play.
Right.
So there's that uncertainty from an experience standpoint, but it's more about Blake just really having a great senior year. When he signed with Notre Dame, he was a big, strong, physical kid that I just thought he has to move to guard at some point. Like eventually he's going to move to guard. I still would like to see him move to guard because I think he could be a top 15 NFL draft pick as a guard. He could be an All-American, Quentin Nelson-esque type of player at guard. But now I think he could also be really good at tackle. And I didn't feel that coming into a senior year. What I liked about it is he's a big, strong kid that's just better than everybody else he goes against. Yet he still went in this past offseason working, and he's a top 100 recruit. I believe Rivals already had him as a 5-star early. He already was locked into Notre Dame. There was really no reason for him. He's an early enrollee. There was no reason for him to really feel like he had to work really hard to improve his game, and he did. And it may sound kind of trivial to say that, but look, there's a lot of kids that aren't that way.
Yeah.
And so he went out and really reshaped his body. Was in much better shape as a senior. He's always going to be a big kid, but he got rid of some of that baby fat. He just looked, I mean, you saw him, Vince. He just looked a little bit more filled out up top, where it was more, okay, that's some weight room work in there up top, not just you're a big boy by birth. And his game improved. Foot quickness was better. His knee bend was better. He was more agile this year. His conditioning was better. Watching him later in games, he was more, able to kind of just keep playing at a high level. And he didn't lose any power at all. And he's a guy, when you watch SEC teams, this is the kind of kid you always see playing for SEC teams.
Right.
Where do they find these 330-pound guys that can move? Notre Dame found one at Avon, and they're gonna have that guy. And they haven't had a guy with that combination of size and athleticism since Quentin Nelson. I'm not saying he's going to be a generational player like Quentin Nelson. I'm talking skill set, like size, athleticism combination, where he's always going to be big. Somebody said, well, should he lose 20 pounds? No, he shouldn't lose 20 pounds. He should keep staying at where he is. He could just turn some of it into a different type of weight. But this is a massive, massive young man who's surprisingly agile and an absolutely dominant player, and was one of the top recruiters in the class. Not top recruits, top recruiters in the class.
Right.
He was very important to this class staying together. He was the person that kind of dictated who was in or out of the group chats and those kind of things. So he was one of the top recruiters in this class, and you always need guys like that.
Well, let's head over the state line north to Clarkston, Michigan, and let's talk about Rocco Spindler, sir.
This was a big pickup for them. I mean, they had to beat out Penn State and Michigan for him.
Yep.
LSU wanted him. Ohio State wanted him. This is a kid that everybody all over the country wanted. I like Rocco's game a lot. First of all, he's got a great name. I mean,
yes, of course.
He's a guard named Rocco. I mean, that's fitting. DNA is good. His dad, Mark Spindler, played in the NFL for a long time for the Lions.
Boy, yeah.
He's got a wrestling background. I always love Lima wrestling backgrounds, and he's a surprisingly athletic player. He was a guard his whole career, moved to tackle as a senior, and looked good at tackle. I still think he's a guard, but he showed if you need him to, he could go play tackle. Good athlete. I think he's got to work on his pad level, but again, it's not a flexibility thing. It's more of a technique thing. Just coming up high. Quick feet, moves well, change of direction, works well in space, works well at the second level. Really talented player, Vince, that is because of that wrestling background, the technique advancement. He's a 290 plus. He's a guy that you could say, if these are two linemen that could find themselves on the field early in their careers.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they need to play, but they're just that good that they can beat guys out. And you don't see that very often along the offensive line.
And then it's kind of a two-tiered class, right? You got the two that you just talked about, and then you got the other three. And that's not saying that the other three are just, whatevers. They still come together to make a pretty darn good class, but there's some room to grow for sure. And let's start with Caleb Johnson. He's out of Florida, Ocala Trinity Catholic. I think he's your third-ranked offensive lineman in this class.
For now, yeah. Third-ranked now, fourth-ranked and upside. And we'll get to that here in a second. But I like Caleb Johnson. He's a tough kid. You flipped him from Auburn, one of several kids at Notre Dame flipped this cycle. Strong kid, 6'7". I don't know if he's all a 6'7". It wouldn't surprise me if he's more 6'5.5", but again, long enough.
Okay.
Has good length, but not the kind of length you'd think from a guy that's listed at 6'7". So I think there might be some guard potential for him down the road, but tough kid. He's that phone booth guy, Vince, and you hear this in offensive line play all the time. Like, if you get him in tight quarters, he's going to be really good. He's got to work on, he's a guy that to me doesn't bend great because I don't think he has the great flexibility. He's always going to be a bit tight in the hips.
Yep.
He's always going to play a little bit high, which is why I think maybe guard down the road might be the place for him. He's more of a right tackle guard kind of guy. Tough, strong.
I've got one of those playing baseball for me. He's the right guard on the football team.
Right.
Working on that flexibility.
Right.
A little bit. Yeah, right.
And that's who he is, but he's a tough kid. He's got good vertical athleticism. Like, there's two types of athleticism for the offensive line. There's the tackle athleticism where you got to be able to work laterally in your change of direction. He's not great there, but then there's the other type of athleticism, which is just that off the line burst. And he's got that. He can really hammer you off the line. Got to work on his hand technique a little bit, but you can see it. He's got strong hands. He's a talented kid. He needs time to develop. His is more of a technique flexibility thing, but he's going to get it. He's going to get it. There's not going to be a need for him to come in right away. So, if this is your third guy, he's not a bad third guy to build around. I don't want to make it seem that way, but there's this kind of third guy, and then there's 2017 where you had Aaron Banks, Robert Hainsey, and Josh Lugg. Right. He's not that level yet. And so, again, it's a very good class, but what's the standard we're holding Notre Dame to? That's the thing. But look, if Caleb Johnson is a starter at right tackle or guard for you in 3 or 4 years, you're going to be pretty good.
One of the guys that really intrigues me in this class and is Joe Alt. And he's never really played tackle before. He was a tight end in high school. He's from Minnesota. I believe Notre Dame beat out the University of Minnesota for his services. Talk to me about Joe Alt, because I think that he's a very intriguing guy in this class.
He's the guy I was referring to earlier when I said he's the difference between this being a B+ and an A class.
Gotcha.
Because Joe Alt right now is that kind of project guy. He was like 245 pounds when he committed to Notre Dame. He's listed at 280 now. I don't know if he's 280 or not.
Whoa.
He definitely got bigger as a senior. You'd see it on film, but just anyone can be 300 pounds. Can you be 300 pounds and still be quick and agile and move? If he is 280, from what I saw on his senior film, that's a great sign, because he didn't look any slower. His foot quickness didn't change. His flexibility didn't change. He still played tight end as a senior. And, and he definitely was thicker, but he still moved the same that he did as a 245-pound guy. That's huge. He's another guy with good DNA. I think his dad played football at Iowa. I believe his dad was also a tight end, went to Iowa, became a tackle.
Yeah,
right?
It was the same story. Yeah, right.
Right. And, and so this is a kid that he is that typical low floor, high ceiling offensive lineman. This is the kind of kid that goes to Iowa, goes to Minnesota. No one ever hears of him because he's a 3-star recruit. And then all of a sudden you're like 3 years later, he's an all Big Ten player.
Right.
And you're like, oh, wow, where'd that guy come from? Well, Notre Dame went and found that guy. And kudos to the staff. And here's where I give them credit. They missed on Wyatt Milam and some of those Nolan Rucci and some of those top guys that I think they should have got at least one of. So what do you do about it? You just complain about it and say, oh, woe is us? Or you say, okay, let's go find somebody. Well, this is the kind of replacement you need when you miss on guys like that, because he does have that sort of ceiling that if it all goes right, and again, a lot has to go right, but if it all goes right, you could be saying, like, who ranked Joe Alt as a 3-star? Like, what were you thinking, And so those tools are there. I gave him a 3.5-star grade, which is kind of for me, it's that top 300 to 400 kind of guy. That's where I rank him. But I gave him a 4.5-star upside, which is a top 50 player, because it's one of those guys that right now he's not a top lineman, but he's got some tools that if he pans out, he's going to go way past his current recruiting ranking. And he's a guy that you're looking at as a 2-3 year starter that's going to be drafted in the day 1 or day 2 of the NFL. He has that kind of upside. The difference is Liam Eichenberg had that from day 1. You just needed to refine the technique, but he was big, he was strong, he was athletic. This is a kid who may not ever get there because you don't know how he's going to handle another 20, 30 pounds. But if he can put on that 20, 30 pounds, continue getting stronger, and maintain his athleticism and length, boy, he's got a chance. So low floor, high ceiling guy, that if it clicks and they get this one right, now all of a sudden you have that third stud in this class. And now we're talking about this class in a completely different frame. It's going to be different. And that's what I really like about Joe Alt.
And to round out the offensive line class, Notre Dame went into Chicago. Not surprising, because they're usually fairly successful in the Chicagoland area. But they went to Chicago Marist, and they got an interior guy named Pat Coogan. Tell me about Mr. Coogan.
Tough kid. He's listed anywhere between 285 to 300 pounds. He looks at least 285, 290. Another guy, we talked a lot about this on the defensive class, Vince, but a guy that we just didn't get to see a chance to watch him progress because he didn't play his senior year because of, the state canceling football. So we didn't get a chance to see if he could take that next step. Had a chance to see him at camp, at the lineman camp. Tough, gritty kid. He's a typical Midwestern, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana kind of recruit. Not a great athlete, not the most nimble guy, but a tough, competitive kid. You put him at guard and center, and at the very worst, he's a good backup for you.
Yeah.
And at best, maybe as a junior or senior, he can go out there and win a starting job at center or guard, and guys like that are good to have. And he's going to be a team player. He's going to be all about Notre Dame and do what he's asked to do. And if you say, hey, be my backup center, he's going to say, thank you, coach. I'll give you everything I got. You need guys like that, because if he was a top 50 recruit and he wasn't playing, those guys are more prone to leave. So he's a guy that to me made a lot of sense. And if you can have a Pat Coogan as your 5th offensive lineman every year, you're going to have good depth. I mean, you're going to have real good depth because he's that kind of Midwestern, tough, gritty kid that's going to give you everything he's got. He's going to be coachable and, have a chance to surprise and be a quality. He's a kind of like John Dirksen. He's not as athletic as Dirksen but he's got a little bit more pop than Dirksen had, but very similar type of career. If he's a 3-year, backup right guard that has to play when his number's called, that's who he can be. And you need some guys like that.
Yeah, there's no question. And Notre Dame has used guys like that in the past. I mean, there's no question. And his name is escaping me, and it's killing me. But last year,
Trevor Ruhlin.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly who I'm talking about. We had him on the radio show, the pregame show this year. And but he's exactly that kid. He's a Notre Dame kid. He was, just a perennial backup, but when his number was called, he went in and he did his business. And he's a guy that you can count on. And if Coogan ends up being that kid, I think that everything will be just fine for him.
You really do need guys like that. Every team needs guys like that. That just,
Absolutely.
hey, I'm part of the group. I'm going to give you everything I got. I'm not going to make waves. I'm going to bust my hump. And if I get my chance, I get my chance. If not, I love being with my brothers and I'm going to be ready when my number's called. And you do need guys like that. So I have no problem with them taking Pat Coogan. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And
sure.
And you need, like I said, he's that great depth guy. And maybe someday, maybe he gets a little bit quicker or the strength program benefits him more than I think it will. And he ends up being a pretty good starter at guard or center. And the other thing too is I think that playing him at center would make a lot of sense. And they need somebody who can play center because right now, if you move Jarrett Patterson, who the heck is your next center? So it'd be nice to have kind of another young center you can groom to be that depth guy. I think would be very important. So I would like to see them behind Zeke Correll. Yeah, because if you move Jarrett Patterson, who are you going to have? It's Zeke Correll and what?
Right.
So it'd be nice to kind of establish some depth there. And I think Pat Coogan's a guy that you can move there and say, hey, we're going to teach you how to play this position and go learn it. And that's a position where I could see him being effective and being a starting caliber player because you can always protect the center with guards. If he's a tough, smart kid, but maybe not the quickest guy, there are things you can do schematically to protect him a little bit. And Coogan has the tools that you would want, and a guy that maybe you'll accept having to protect that guy because he brings toughness, leadership, consistency, those kind of things to the table.
Absolutely. So those are our thoughts on the 2021 offensive recruiting class for Notre Dame. If you're curious as to what we thought about the defensive side of the ball, go check out our podcast that we just put up this morning, as well as the videos over on our YouTube channel. We kind of cut it up so that it was each position group in a video, so you can peruse your way through that. And again, I saw some of the guys talking about it in the chat. Give us a follow over our subscription, little tap right there on our YouTube channel, and we'll keep bringing you some good information. I can promise you that we're really diving into this thing head first, and we're really enjoying ourselves. And it's funny because we got done today, and we were planning on recording this one, and Bryan was like, "Hey, let's go live."
Well, we had to do the radio show.
Sure.
We had to wait because we didn't want to do the show early and then not have to talk about Logan Diggs. And then I didn't want to talk about Logan Diggs. And then it was obvious that we got tipped off that he was going to pick Notre. We don't really do that. So we're like, well, let's wait. And then we had to do the radio show. And by that time, it was like, well, we're going to have to put it out tomorrow. Well, then it was like, well, let's just do it live because we recorded. It takes an hour. And then it takes another 20 minutes to produce it and get it all set. And it'd be up at like 9:30.
Yeah,
I mean,
at least.
So we'll do it live and then we can still do all those things, but the people that want it now can get it now. And the people that are okay waiting can wait and they can listen to it later. But we really do appreciate all you guys. We thought it would take months to kind of get to where we've already gotten to with our YouTube channel. And that's because of y'all. We appreciate it. We've really seen growth in our podcast, our site we've talked about has taken off. And the YouTube channel's taken off too. So we really appreciate you guys being with us. And we're going to always try to bring you something that we don't think you can find in other places. And that's actual analysis. And so we're excited about that, and we love talking ball. So you guys keep listening. We're going to keep talking ball. If you have some suggestions on things you'd like to hear us talk about, podcast ideas, ideas for a breakdown, anything like that, shoot us you can find me on Twitter at Coach D178. Subscribe to our Irish Breakdown fan group. You can ask questions on there. I'll be very interactive. You can ask questions on our message board as well on the website, which I'm hearing is supposed to be happening within the next month or so. We should have that back. Or leave us a comment in one of the YouTube things. So if you are interested in, hey, I wish you guys would talk about this, or what about this topic, we're always open to ideas because we're trying to do a show a day. And some days we're like, what are we going to talk about today?
My wife is still amazed we can come up with something to talk about every day.
So give us some ideas. If there's things you guys want to hear about, we'd love to hear it. And subscribe, check us out, and we'll give you guys all the content you want and need.
No doubt about that. So for Bryan Driskell, he's the publisher. I'm Vince DeDario. I'm the football analyst. And we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.